All right, I am here with the amazing Dr. Dean Ornish. Dean, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to hit you with a bunch of questions. I asked you guys, the audience, what I should ask him, and I got a ton of questions. So we're going to try and hit on about 10 or 12 of those. Some of the slightly more difficult, pressing questions we'll leave toward the end. You have a new book that just came out with your wife, Anne, I believe. It's called Undo It, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Dr. Dean Ornish is pretty prestigious man here. He has a ton of amazing studies that I've quoted. I believe the first video that I ever did actually quoted some of your research, which is funny.
Cool.
I misquoted it a little bit. I think I quoted it as being a vegan diet, which I then mentioned it wasn't. It was almost there, and we'll talk a little bit about that toward the end.
It is now.
It is now. It is now. Do you hear that?
Everything in the book is vegan.
Okay, cool.
And everything in our recent studies is vegan.
Awesome. So we'll talk about that transformation in a second. When I think of you, I think of telomeres.
Telomeres are like the plastic tips on the ends of your shoelace that keep your shoelace from unraveling. They keep our DNA from unraveling.
Your telomeres, as you age, they degrade. And so you're the first person, I don't know if you're the first person, one of the first people to do research showing that through lifestyle changes, you can actually lengthen those telomeres again. So if you want to talk anything about that.
Sure. Yeah, we did the first study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, which, as you say, are the ends of our chromosomes that regulate how long we live. And as we get older, our telomeres get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from pretty much everything goes up correspondingly. And we found that these same lifestyle changes that could reverse heart disease, diabetes, early stage prostate cancer, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, et cetera, could actually lengthen telomeres. And when we published this in the Lancet Oncology, the Lancet editor sent out a press release worldwide calling it Reversing Aging at a Cellular Level. And one of the interesting things and the real theme of this new book is that although we tend to think that there has to be a different set of diet and lifestyle program interventions for different diseases, that we found over the 40 years of doing these studies that these same lifestyle changes, a whole foods, plant-based vegan diet, moderate exercise, various stress management techniques, including meditation and yoga, and what we euphemistically call psychosocial support, which is really love and intimacy, or to reduce it still further to eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Boom, that's it. The more diseases we study and the more mechanisms we look at, the more reasons we have to explain why these simple changes are so powerful and how quickly people can get better in ways we can measure. And I think our unique contribution has been to use these very high-tech, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. And part of what I talk about in the new book is a unifying theory, which is that, I was trained, like all doctors, to view heart disease as a very different disease than diabetes, is very different than Alzheimer's or prostate cancer or breast cancer or whatever. And the radical theory that I'm putting forth here is that they're really the same disease masquerading in different forms, because they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in your microbiome and your telomeres and gene expression and angiogenesis and so on. And each one of these mechanisms is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have.
Awesome. And I'm going to ask you a question about those different lifestyle factors in a second. But first, so the exact mechanism that the telomeres are growing back, what do you think? Do you think it's a natural process that we have?
And as DNA replicates, like any kind of replication, there's always errors that are introduced. And over time, it causes the telomeres to be shorter. So put your question in a larger context. One of the things that continually impresses me over 4 decades of doing these studies is that our body often has a remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized, if we simply stop doing what's causing the problem, which to a large degree are these lifestyle choices. So we don't know exactly the mechanism by which the telomeres begin to heal, but we know that they do. We found, for example, in a study that we published with Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome, that these same lifestyle changes change your gene expression in over 500 genes in just 3 months. In effect, turning on or upregulating the genes that keep us healthy, turning off or downregulating the genes that cause us to get sick, and particularly the genes that cause, again, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes and particularly what are called the oncogenes that promote prostate cancer, breast cancer, and colon cancer. Just within 3 months, hundreds of them changed. In fact, one study showed that just meditation alone could actually change your gene expression in hundreds of genes in just 8 weeks. And so our bodies are so much more dynamic than we had once realized. And this unifying theory helps explain why a vegan diet is so powerful at not only preventing but even reversing the most common chronic diseases, and why populations in this country or whole countries like in Asia, for example, that eat mostly a vegan diet had very, very low rates of these chronic diseases, even though they have the same genetic diversity that we have here. But when they start to, over time, eat like us and live like us, they now die like us. And so these rates of chronic diseases are skyrocketing in those countries just like they are here. So our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. And by eating a vegan diet and making these other lifestyle changes, we can allow our body's innate healing mechanisms to begin to work.
Awesome. And then speaking of the different lifestyle things, I know I am largely always talking about the dietary aspect. I do mention exercise and things like that. So you're saying all these things from like love more and probably meditate more. I'm probably butchering it, but we'd like to think it was just Netflix more or something like that. But if there was one thing that, someone could just add one of those extra lifestyle factors in, they already are on a vegan diet, what would it be? And then hopefully that'll be the gateway drug to more lifestyle improvements. But if you would point at one, what would it be?
Well, I would point to three more: the eat well. You've already done the eat well, the move more, stress less, and love more. But if you had to pick one of those, which is a little hard, it's like which is your favorite child? I would say love more, because study after study have shown, and the love more is the part of our program that people often have the most hard time with. Like, I get you got to eat. It's just a question of what, and exercise. You're really doing something, and stress is important. But love more. Well, I mean, that sounds so touchy feely, and I used to get really defensive and say, oh no, look at our hard science, our quantitative arteriograms, and our PET scans, and radionuclide ventriculograms, and blah blah blah. And then one day I said, it is touchy feely. That's what makes our program work so well, because we are touchy-feely creatures. We are creatures of love and community. That's how we've survived as a species all these years. That's one of the reasons why people become vegan, is because it's not just what's good for you. It's also what's good for you is good for the 7 billion animals that get slaughtered every year to provide protein that we can get through plant-based sources. And more global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined. So properly understood, love more actually impacts on our diet and lifestyle choices as well. But study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from virtually all causes when compared to those who have that sense of love and connection and community. And nothing, even in a diet and even smoking, doesn't have that powerful an impact.
I would say, hearing that statistic, if you're depressed, now that if you're depressed, you're going to die more. So what do you, I just know there's probably somebody who's watching this who's like, oh man, that was not something that they want to hear. But what do you think? I mean, the love more thing, what do you think the first tangible thing you can do to make this happen would be? Or, fight depression, for example, what would you say?
Well, I know from firsthand experience that's how I got interested in doing this work. I was suicidally depressed when I was in college, and I wrote about that in this book and several of the others. That was my doorway. And, part of the reason is, these techniques are not just designed to unclog your arteries or live longer, because, the real epidemic in our culture is loneliness and depression. More prescriptions are written for antidepressants than just about anything else. And telling somebody who's lonely and depressed they're going to live longer if they just eat healthier or whatever doesn't work that well. Now, we found in our studies, we've now trained hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country, Medicare and most insurance companies are paying for it, is we're cutting depression scores in half. Because it's not enough to just give people information and expect them to change. I mean, we're drowning in information. When you can do a Google search of 1 million things in a fraction of a second, and it's not like you tell somebody who smokes, hey, quit smoking, it's bad for you. And they go, I didn't know that. I'll quit today. It's like everybody. It's on every pack of cigarettes. So I ask people, why do you do these things? And they say, because they help us deal with our loneliness, our depression, our pain. I've had patients say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes, and they're always there for me, and nobody else is. Think my 20 friends, or food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or video games numb the pain, or opioids, or other drugs numb the pain, or working all the time, whatever. So by focusing on using these techniques of, say, meditation and support groups where people can talk openly and authentically and open their hearts to each other, they can quiet down their mind and experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, and ultimately transcendence, that on one level we're all a part of something larger than ourselves. It's kind of the anti-political ethos these days of the other, and then you can do bad things because they're different, is what really connects us all. And then that, to me, is where healing is really at its most profound. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. Yoga is from the Sanskrit to yoke. These are unite. These are really old ideas that we're rediscovering, and that they not only have effect on the quality of our life, they actually have effect on our survival, and much greater than anything we'd ever realized before.
Nice. So I have one last question sort of on the depression vein and so forth. So I know a lot of people have more like paralyzing depression. It's super hard for them to get motivated to make these changes. So let's say there's somebody out in some random state with no programs like this. I don't know, they're in like northern Alabama or something. What would you suggest they do to try and work through, from someone who has the experience of depression, to work through like the paralyzing aspect of that? Because that's something I can't speak to. I haven't had it, so maybe you can.
Yeah, well, first of all, we have programs in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Little Rock, Arkansas, places like that. But putting that aside, the worst thing about being depressed is that it's a true reality distortion field. I mean, you really think that you're seeing things clearly for the first time. That things are bad, they've always been bad, they're always going to be bad. That's where that helplessness and hopelessness, which is the hallmark of depression, really comes from. And it's a true distortion. And that's when people start to think, well, if things are always going to be bad, why don't I just do myself in? Dead people look like they're peaceful and all that. But it is a distortion. And so that's where it's really important to try to, reach out to a friend and, try to get a different reality, because it is a true reality distortion. It's not the way that things are. And part of the value of these different techniques is that you can rediscover inner sources of peace and joy and well-being. So often depression comes because people think they have to get something outside themselves to be happy and to be able to love themselves. Gosh, if only I had more money, more power, more beauty, more sex, more accomplishment, then I'd be happy. And once you set up that view of the world, however, it turns out you feel more depressed, because if you don't get it, you feel bad. If someone else gets it, then you feel really bad. And even if you get it, it's good for a few minutes, and then it doesn't really fill that hole, that void. It's like, well, now what? It's never enough, or so what? Big deal. And so, well, maybe this will do it. And so the reason I call my new book, Undo It, is I studied yoga and meditation for 40 years with an ecumenical spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda. And people would say, what are you, a Hindu? He'd say, no, I'm an undu, which
interesting.
It's a great pun. And the idea is that these, eating a plant-based diet, meditation, yoga, and so on, they quiet down our mind so we can experience that our peace of mind, our sense of love, our sense of happiness are not things we get from outside ourselves. That's really our natural state. And not being mindful of that, we think, okay, I've got to get this, this, and this. And then perhaps the supreme irony, in running after all these things, we disturb what we could have already if we just stopped doing that, if we could just undo it by letting go of all these things, as opposed to trying to think that they're going to bring us what we really already have if we just stop disturbing it.
That's well said. I don't really talk about it on my channel very much, but I grew up in like a meditation community, transcendental meditation, Maharishi, the Beatles guru, and so forth. And so that kind of shaped a little bit. Obviously, some people took it a little too far. They went too far. They didn't undo it. Let's say that.
Why My Guitar Gently Weeps was all about that.
That's interesting, and maybe I'll leave that for another time. You mentioned that you're doing you've done a ton of these studies. You're using scientific approach. And so as somebody who's, hopefully in the next year or so going to be done with a master's in public health and wants to do studies, how did you make these happen? Every time I think of a study, you start kind of crunching the numbers with people, and it's like, yeah, that would probably cost $1 million. That would cost a couple $1 billion or whatever. Yeah. And so what did you do, if you have a quick answer to that? If not, no problem.
Well, I started doing studies when I was a second-year medical student. And one of the nice things about doing a medical student is you don't know enough to know what's impossible. So in my kind of naivete, I said, let's just do it. And I don't know, there's this kind of mystical thing in the universe that when you really commit to doing something, and you really are doing it for the good of the public, the universe conspires to help you. And known and unknown angels come along. And, in doing the studies, I had to raise $50,000 a month to do the studies. I didn't know where the money would come from, because in the early days, because people thought it was impossible to reverse heart disease. Why should we waste our money funding a study that everybody knows is going to fail? And it's a bit of a catch-22, because without the funding, you can't show that it works. And if they don't think it's going to work, they don't want to fund it. So I said, let's just do it, and somehow the money will come. And every day on the last day of the month, somehow the money would come. So I would just say to you, I can't really say anything that sounds more precise and scientific than that. But if you really are committed to doing something and you're doing it for the good of other people, somehow the universe conspires to make it happen.
All right. That was not the answer I was expecting, but I like the answer. So I had another question when you just mentioned of unclogging arteries. I had a very specific question from somebody. They say, would a plant-based diet help with congestive heart failure? Is that something that's just like too intense?
No, actually, it depends on the cause of it. Most congestive heart failure is due to coronary artery disease. And we have several people, one of whom I mentioned in the new book, in the Undo It book, who was a doctor himself, an internal medicine specialist, who had such bad congestive heart failure that he was told they needed to have a heart transplant, that his heart was just too far gone. So he lived in Los Angeles. He went through my reversing heart disease program at UCLA for 9 weeks to get in better shape for the heart transplant. And his heart got so much better in 9 weeks, he didn't need the heart transplant. So
9 weeks.
So you tell me, like, what's and people say, oh, why are you doing this radical intervention, this vegan diet and meditation and all this weird stuff? Like, why don't you do something more conventional, like conservative, like a heart transplant? Like,
Why don't you just saw that chest cavity open? That sounds way better.
So it just shows, again, that the biggest obstacle that I find to get people to be motivated to change their lifestyle is they think, how powerful could diet and exercise and all this touchy-feely stuff be, you know? It's not like a new drug or new laser or new surgical procedure. And yet our unique contribution has been to use these very high-tech, state-of-the-art scientific measures to show just how powerful these simple changes in diet and lifestyle can be and how quickly you can get better.
That's what I always say. If they could put it in a pill, it'd be worth $1 billion. And to follow up on that, and this was something I was sort of questioning in one of my recent heart disease videos, and that was, if you have calcified, like thoroughly calcified plaque in your arteries, do you think that can be reversed? And if you've seen it reversed and so forth?
Yeah, actually the people who have calcified arteries are often at lower risk for heart disease because this heart disease is stable. They don't break. It's actually the 20 or 30% blockages that often are the ones that cause a heart attack because they're fresh, they're unstable. You can get what's called plaque hemorrhage, where you get bleeding into the lining of artery and can suddenly go to 100% clog. And so even if you have calcifications, you also have other blockages in there that are not calcified, and those are the ones that can reverse. And we've seen that over and over again when people make big enough changes.
But you would say, even though it's not as lethal, the calcified stuff might not be as reversible, you're saying?
No, that the calcifications themselves may not be reversible, but within there's a lot of soft plaque that is.
So you could clear out a lot.
And that's enough to make.
Got it. Cool.
That's right. It doesn't have to go to zero. You just have to get it past the point it becomes unstable and critically stenosed.
Another question, just a fun question for you. If you had $5 million right now, what would the study that you would do be? So what would you do? $5 million.
I did a study that I'm doing already, except extended longer, which is we're doing the first randomized trial to see if these same lifestyle changes can reverse early stage Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's, wow.
And no, my mom died of Alzheimer's, so it's personal for me. And there are no good drugs for treating it or for preventing it. And I think we're at the same place with Alzheimer's that we were with other chronic diseases. There's every reason to think it's going to work, but no one's done that. And when you lose your memories, you lose everything. And by the way, if anyone's watching this and you live in the San Francisco Bay Area and you or someone you care about has early stage Alzheimer's, just go to ornish.com and you'll see a link to the site and the 2-page explanation of our study. It's all for free for anybody who's interested because we've raised millions of dollars to do the study. We provide you all your food, everything that you need, all the testing and so on. I'm more excited about this than anything I've done in many, many years because I have a good feeling that it may actually work.
That's awesome. I will link that directly below. That should be the first link. And so that's amazing. My grandma died of Alzheimer's, and I have a video on that as well, and the whole clogged brain artery aspect. Of course, we don't have that concrete data yet, so you're doing it. So that's funny. I'm asking you, what would you do if you had millions of dollars? Oh, I already do. So it's probably too early to ask what any results are, but any promising results that you can share?
I would get in trouble if I started sharing results. But let's just say I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very much the way we're with these other chronic diseases. And there's every reason to think it's going to work, but no one's actually proven it yet.
Okay. I will keep my eye out. The moment that's out, I'm going to do a video on that study.
Cool.
All right. So let's get on to the question. So in the beginning, you said you've sort of transitioned from what would be a 95 to 99% vegan diet, studying that to a 100% vegan diet. Obviously, this is a vegan channel, and I talk about the studies on a vegan diet, and I also talk about like the ethical and the environmental stuff. So I wasn't fully aware that you did that. I didn't know if you were still on the, like maybe some low-fat dairy is okay or whatever. And someone said they saw fish oil supplements and stuff somewhere in your articles or something. So if you want to say anything, I'm curious about that.
Well, I think part of the confusion is that I wrote an earlier book called The Spectrum that had a piece of salmon on the cover. And the attitude was, start where you are and move in that direction. And as you start to feel better, then you'll want to do more. That for many people, it's just too big a leap to go all at once. But in all the studies that we've done for the last 20 years, the diet, for like maybe 30 years now, the diet intervention has been a whole foods, plant-based, vegan diet that's naturally low in fat, low in sugar, low in refined carbs, high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and soy products as they come in nature. And there are literally hundreds of thousands, as you know, protective substances in these substances in these ways of eating. And so, and again, it helps reduce global warming. You have free up a lot of resources to feed the hungry. You don't have to slaughter sentient beings that you don't need to. And so, for all these reasons, I think it makes by far the most powerful way to eat.
Yep. So you heard it right there from the man.
And with fish oil, I tell people, you can get omega-3s from fish oil, but the fish get it from the plankton. So why not just go back to the source, originally? But again, as you get older, I become a little less rigid and say, meet people where they are. Otherwise, you just turn them off completely, and then they just get more ingrained in their ignorance. So just say, look, to the degree you make these changes, you're going to look better, feel better, lose weight, gain health. Then you're going to want to do more. And then, as you found, then you just kind of organically let go of these other things. And then then you don't have this daily battle of self-denial, because you've kind of realized from your own experience that you not only are going to live longer, but you're going to live better and feel better.
And then I would also add, when you started doing this, there wasn't a Beyond Meat burger that you could go get in the store, although that's probably not going to help you reverse heart disease. But telling people to go vegan is probably a little bit more out there and wacky sounding than even today.
Well, I grew up in Texas, eating 3 or 5 times a day. So that was a big departure for me.
All right. So we covered a bunch of super interesting stuff. And so thank you so much, Dr. Dean Ornish, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Again, his book, Undo It, with his wife, Anne, is available now. It's on Amazon. Is there a better place to go and buy it?
Well, always good to support your local bookseller, but Amazon's great as well. Barnes & Noble, anywhere you can get it. We're thrilled to have it out there. To me, that's what gets me out of bed every day in the morning, is knowing that what we've done can empower people with new choice, new hope, and feeling better in ways that can really make a profound difference in your life and in mine as well. So, to me, awareness is always the first step in healing, and I'm really grateful to you for the opportunity to share this information with people, and I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You too.